Okay, here we're going to complete this proof, and we're given that AB is congruent to AC, and those are symbolized right here, and that X is the midpoint of BC. So we've drawn a line AX here. So when I'm doing a proof, I first start off with what is given. And so I just write those there at the very top. And what we're trying to prove is that angle B is congruent to angle C. So that is going to be our very last statement. That's where we want to end up. So let's look at this triangle and see what it's showing us. Do you see how AX is dividing this big triangle into two smaller triangles? Let me highlight those two triangles. Here we have this green triangle and an orange triangle. Those triangles look the same size, don't they? They look like they are congruent. Remember last week we talked about the congruent parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Or, I'm sorry, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So if we know two triangles are congruent, then we know that the corresponding sides are congruent. We know that the corresponding angles are congruent. So if I can prove that these two triangles are congruent, then B and C are congruent based on the corresponding parts of corresponding triangles are congruent. So that is kind of our end point. We want to prove that those two triangles are congruent. Therefore, the angles are also congruent. So how do we get there? What do we know about these two triangles? We know that these two sides are congruent. We have one side, and we know that this is a midpoint. What does the definition of a midpoint tell us? The definition of a midpoint tells us that it breaks this segment into two equal parts. So BX is congruent to XC. So let me draw that here, symbolize that with these two lines. So now we have two sides that are congruent. Do we know anything else about the angles or this third side here? Well, if you look at this third side, you see that is the same, they're sharing a side. This is a side for the green triangle, and it's also a side for the orange triangle. It is the same size for both of them because it's the same thing. So that is my third side that is congruent. Because AX equals AX, something equals itself because of that reflexive property of equality. So I can now prove that these two triangles are congruent because side, side, side. Three sides are congruent. So again, since those three sides are congruent, we can conclude that those corresponding angles are congruent as well. We can conclude that angle B is congruent to angle C because the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent.